I've got an interesting question for you this week, and I know we get asked this a lot. And it
Okay.
is, should we be servicing our bilingual and multilingual learners, or BMLs, within the learning support department? Now, we know that schools and teachers want the best for their students, don't
Yes.
we? And we know that they want to do the right thing. But very often in this field, they just don't have enough expertise. So I
Or
wanted to know,
supports.
yeah, or support. And I just wanted to know what you think, since you come
Mm,
from a special ed or a learning support background and having
yeah.
worked for many, many years in that role in schools. So I think you'd be best qualified to answer that.
Okay. So the first thing that I was thinking about is there's two answers to that. First one is yes, and the second no. All right. So let me
Okay.
tell you a little bit more because that doesn't help you very much. So, yes, you certainly can service your BMLs or EAL students within a learning support department if they already have a a
Excellent.
diagnosis of something that lends itself to getting support. Keyword was diagnosis, okay? So it means that an outside professional like a psychologist or some speech therapist in terms of speech and language supports, somebody outside of the school needs to have worked with the student and, you know, determined that they need that support and based on a diagnosis. So that's number one. So the no is now a little bit simpler to understand, right? So no, you shouldn't be servicing any student in learning support that doesn't have any diagnosis, okay? Because really there's some implications for that. And we know within our population of students who are learning languages, especially bilinguals, learning English within our school systems, they're overrepresented in learning support settings.
That's true.
So there's plenty of research about that. So there's a lot of difficulties surrounding this. So that's why we need to have such clear and succinct policies and procedures within schools to ensure that students are not falling through the cracks and some of them are being labeled as students with special needs when they're actually just students going through different stages of language learning, right? And
Yeah.
that can look an awful lot like, processing disorders. It can look like a lot of different language
Yeah.
issues.
So the problem is that a lot of, during the language trajectory that a BML may have,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can mimic what looks like a
Exactly.
learning issue, or teachers may say the child has done 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
of progress and now they don't seem to be doing very much progress at all, and that's when they worry, and then that's when they'll
Right.
refer the child further for further assessments, when in actual fact it's just part of the language
Yeah.
trajectory that a BML
That
has.
stage. And we know that students can move from stage to stage, and sometimes it's struggle is a normal part of that, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
have to understand when is the struggle normal and when is it, you know, something that's more exceptional.
Yeah.
So that's very important, and it comes back to training. Um, there's
Yeah.
just not enough teacher training when it comes to the normal trajectories of our BML's language development, and for them to understand what's normal and what might be atypical and that kind of thing. So that's certainly something that we want to emphasize here. Now, if and we've seen that a lot within our intervention, because just to give a little background, Francesca and I used to run after school intervention programs for children who had literacy issues, basically.
Yeah.
So what we used to see were students coming to us with diagnosed disabilities like, reading
Dyslexia.
disorders, dyslexia, processing disorders. And the sad thing was that a lot of the professionals, like the psychologists who had done those reports and those assessments with the students, actually didn't ask the family or even question their language background. So a lot of the children coming from or living in Dubai, they're coming from bilingual families, but English is one of the shared languages there. So they speak, a lot of the
Assumed.
kids speak very fluently, right? They have
Yep.
conversational language. So that person who was doing
and
the
they measured them against the norms for a native English speaker.
Exactly.
And of course, the child then came very below grade level.
Because of vocabulary, because of lack of, the cultural issues, within the testing. So
when you put children who are bilingual or multilinguals into a learning support department, very often some teachers say, well, any intervention is better than none. And actually, I often say, no, that's not right.
Exactly.
Because there's a lot of stigma attached. If a child has a language issue and you put them into the learning support department, the child then starts to think that they have a problem, rather than looking at the fact that they're a bilingual or multilingual and
it's a strength
as an asset.
Yeah,
that's right. So right away you're actually saying, so what would you recommend actually to schools to do?
Yes. So I just want to comment a little bit more on the last point that you mentioned. Now, it's really interesting because it really matters how we look at our students. And that's why we use language like bilingual, multilingual learner, because we want our teachers to focus on the strengths of the student. Student has assets and every student has abilities that we can enrich. And that's what we should be looking at, is enrichment versus remediation. So we need to give students more challenges. And that's why we saw so much success with our students who came to us in our literacy programs. We gave them more reading, more writing. We didn't stop. So by flooding them essentially with more, more literacy and more challenge, they flourished. So that is the key, is that we need to maintain high level expectations for all our learners, but especially maintaining that in terms of what are the overarching philosophies of your support departments. So this is actually a legal issue in most countries, having your students put into learning support without proper diagnoses. So I really want to focus on that. It's a legal issue. Only students with the proper documentation should be in those departments. And you can understand that this needs to happen because we need to have things so clear and separate, right? And I want to say that in most countries, let's say in the UK, in Australia, and Canada and US, Singapore, for example, all the countries where most of our international schools are using the curriculum from, we want to mention that those countries already have policies, very well-established policies and practices. So if, for example, you're working in an international school that is, let's say, a British school, then you should look into the practices that come from the Department for Education in the UK. And I'll just share a little bit. I do have something that I wrote here. So in one of the guidelines, they have this quote: "Children must not be regarded as having a learning difficulty solely because the language or form of language in their home is different from the language in which they'll be taught." So that if that's your starting point,
written in black and white.
Black and white. Yeah. So then it means that there has to be very clear frameworks to happen to ensure children are not being misidentified and put into those scenarios. So this can become a legal issue in all these well-established countries.
Not only should teachers and schools be looking at what their curriculum is dictated by, but I think also the host country too, right?
Definitely.
Because if you're based in, say, for example, Germany, I'm sure but you're a British curriculum school, you need to be looking at what the UK curriculum says, government says, but also what the German education.
Because a lot of times those education ministries do have a lot to do with international schools. I feel that the issues related to learning supports and your BML or EAL department should be very clear going forwards. And a lot of times I know that schools have issues of convenience when they're coming to put their policies into play. They're thinking about, money or budgeting and thinking it might be better to have one specialist teacher working with both departments or running both of those teams. And that's not exactly correct.
False economy, really, isn't it?
Yeah. So we wouldn't recommend you do that. Keep everything separate, keep it clear, and basically focus back on training. Teachers need to be trained. They need to have their own levels of expertise,
Understanding.
especially because bilingual and multilingual learners are the fastest growing school group, right? If you look at international schools, probably most of your class will be speakers of other languages. So that means the teacher now has to take on much more responsible role for their language learners, right? So they need to be empowered with the right expertise, I feel.
That's a great answer. Yeah. So hopefully that can help. I'll get back to the teacher. I'll
Yeah.
send this recording actually and get back to the teacher, and hopefully that can help them in knowing, you know, the practical steps of where to go forward. So thank you, Ali. That's great.
Great. So if any teacher has more questions about this, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. All right. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.